Welcome to another episode of our video series of the Critique of Modern Systems.
Great to be here. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well, thank you. Feeling ready for this because, well, the topic we're getting into today, it really challenges a myth that I think most of us just take for granted.
Oh, absolutely. And we should probably just start right at the top. The central thesis from all this research is that this common idea that health problems or, obesity are just about eating too much.
Or not having enough willpower.
Exactly. That idea is just fundamentally wrong.
So we're essentially reframing this. We're moving away from any idea of a moral failure or laziness and saying these are not behavioral problems, they are symptoms.
Definitive symptoms of food dependency.
And what's so powerful about that framing is that it's universal.
It is. It completely transcends culture, politics, social relationships. It might be the single biggest cultural factor that affects our long-term health. And it starts unknowingly. It's passed down from generation to generation.
Just through the food your grandparents or parents ate.
Right. They're laying the biological groundwork for their children's future cravings without even realizing it.
Okay, so if this is a physical dependency, a biological one, not just in our heads, where is this battle actually taking place in the body?
It's all happening in your gut. To be specific, in your gut microbiota.
That collection of microorganisms we hear so much about.
Yes, this whole combination of bacteria, viruses, fungi, even parasites, all living inside your intestines. It's like a second brain, really.
So why is the initial setup of that community so important?
Okay, this is where it gets really, really interesting. That entire ecosystem, that whole world inside you, is largely established in the first 3 to 5 years of a child's life.
That is incredibly early.
It is. And once that microbial colony is set, once those foundational species have taken root, it is extremely difficult to change it later on.
So you're saying that if your early years are spent feeding the wrong tenants, let's say, you've basically hired a whole colony of bad actors.
That's a perfect way to put it. Their main goal isn't your health. It's just their own survival.
And the sources gave some pretty stark examples of this.
They did. Think about it. A childhood diet of, say, milk made from milk powder and stale bread. Or, years where your school lunch is just soda and something like a simit or a javrak.
Pure sugar and processed carbs.
Exactly. You are giving sugar, gluten, and dairy a massive head start. You're building a highly specialized colony that's designed to thrive on things that are, frankly, poison for your long-term health.
Okay, so once these bad actors have taken over, how do they create a dependency that's so strong it can actually override our conscious mind?
Yeah.
How do they send that message that we have to have the bread or the cheese?
They have two proven and very effective methods, and both of them rely on this biological superhighway called the vagus nerve.
The famous two-way street that connects the gut and the brain. It's the longest nerve in the body, right?
That's the one. So method one is creating cravings, a reward signal.
How does that work?
When those bacteria are deprived of their fuel, the processed carbs, the sugar, they use the vagus nerve to send neurological signals straight to your brain.
And that's what we feel is a craving.
An intense one. The signals are so powerful, people report having vivid dreams about food when they're on a restrictive diet.
That's a biological hijack. It's not you wanting the cake, it's them.
Your brain is totally fooled. It starts to associate eating that substance, the sugar, the pasta, with a feeling of happiness and relief. The language people use is just like addiction. It makes me happy. It makes me feel good.
I can't focus until I have it.
Right. The brain just knows that the distress signal from the gut stopped when it got the sugar.
And the second method? That sounds even harder to deal with because it involves real physical pain.
It does. This is the creation of discomfort. It's a withdrawal syndrome. When you successfully cut out these foods, the bad bacteria start to die off. They're starving.
And that process, the die-off, is what causes these horrible symptoms.
Yes, and it's a huge range of symptoms. The sources list nearly 40 different ones.
Can you give us a sense of what that feels like? Because it's not just, I feel a bit off today.
No, not at all. We're talking about severe flu-like symptoms, but with no actual virus. Extreme fatigue. I mean, people report not being able to lift their arm. There's joint pain, muscle cramps, terrible headaches, and really serious psychological effects like depression and anxiety.
So people feel miserable.
Utterly miserable. And they often mistake this phase, which usually lasts, 10 to 14 days, as proof that the new diet is bad for them.
When really it's the final desperate fight from the bad bacteria.
Precisely. The discomfort is a sign that it's working, not that it's failing.
That's a critical point.
Okay.
So zooming out a bit, why are we so vulnerable to this today? Why are things like gluten and sugar the perfect fuel for these guys?
Let's talk about gluten. The sources point to a massive shift in our agriculture.
Okay.
You have to think about evolutionary time. Our genetics are 99.9% the same as they were for 200,000 years of being hunter-gatherers. The agricultural revolution was only 12,000 years ago.
A blink of an eye, really.
A blink. But the real issue is what's happened in the last century. Driven by the need for huge yields, especially after the World Wars, scientists manipulated wheat chromosomes. They changed the plant to produce way, way more gluten protein in every single grain.
So it's not just a little different. The wheat we eat today is structurally a different food from what our ancestors ate 100 years ago.
It's an entirely different compound. And this is where we have to bust that health halo myth. People trying to be healthy will reach for brown bread, Esmer Ekmek.
Thinking it's the better choice.
Right. But look at the numbers. Regular white bread might have around 2% gluten. Some of those dense brown bread varieties, they can have double that. 4%.
Wow. So you're accidentally consuming more of the addictive substance.
You're doubling down on the antigen. And that's the core issue. Modern gluten is seen by the body as an antigen, a foreign invader. It kicks off an immune response.
Even in people without celiac disease.
Oh, absolutely. So many people suffer from sensitivity without knowing it. And when they cut out gluten, suddenly all these other unrelated things get better. Migraines vanish, brain fog lifts, sleep quality improves.
Which brings us to this idea of the social normalization of discomfort.
Yes.
We just accept feeling bloated all the time or having bad sleep or joint pain. We just say, oh, I'm getting older.
When it could just be a constant low-grade allergic reaction to the food you're eating every single day, we've just lowered the baseline for what feeling normal is. We don't realize how much noise and inflammation is going on until it stops.
But there's a big hurdle here for a lot of people. It's the cost. The perception is that eating healthy, cutting out cheap carbs is just too expensive.
That is a really powerful misconception, and we have to break it. The truth is, if you eliminate the dependency, you save a significant amount of money.
Oh, let's get practical.
Okay, think of the money you spend on the addictive foods that don't even fill you up. The daily pastry, the packaged snacks, the sodas.
A $1 coffee drink.
That alone. If you cut a $5 or $10 a day sugar habit, you're saving hundreds of dollars a month. That money immediately pays for the nutrient-dense whole foods. The addiction is the more expensive path.
And there's another economic benefit, isn't there?
Yes. Once the bad bacteria are gone and the inflammation goes down, you actually feel full on less food. Yeah. And you have higher, more sustained energy levels, even with fewer calories. So you're spending less, wasting less, and getting more energy. It's a triple win.
So for someone listening who is ready to start, what's the strategy? How do you actually change what's on your plate?
The foundational strategy is all about feeding the good bacteria, the lactobacillus and bifidobacterium. And they eat fiber, lots of it.
What's the ratio we should be aiming for?
The plate needs to be 80% vegetables, not 50, not 60. 80.
That's a huge shift.
It is. We're talking about 2 eggs and half an avocado, yes, but with a massive plate of greens, nuts, and other fibrous vegetables. That proportion is what starves out the bad guys and feeds the good ones.
80%.
Yeah.
That's a complete reversal of the modern plate, which is mostly carbs and protein with a little bit of veg on the side.
And you need a technique to make that happen. We call it the salad first technique. It works wonders with kids or even resistant adults. Serve the big bowl of greens and veggies first.
So they fill up on the good stuff first.
Exactly. They achieve satiety earlier. By the time the rice or the chicken comes out, they're already feeling full and are much less likely to overdo it on the high-carb foods.
Okay, that's the physical plate. What about the mental side? How do we learn to tell the difference between a craving from the bacteria and, real hunger?
This is key. We have to break this cultural habit of seeing hunger as a bad thing, a distress signal that needs to be silenced immediately.
An emergency.
Right. When you wait until you are truly physically hungry, not just having a blood sugar crash, simple, healthy food tastes amazing. That's when you eat your meal like honey, as the saying goes.
And what's causing that false hunger we feel so often?
It's the blood sugar roller coaster from the high-carb diet. People feel hungry enough every 2.5 hours, but it's not a real need for calories. It's a blood sugar dip, and it's the bad bacteria screaming for their next fix. You have to learn to just sit with that feeling for an extra hour to retrain your body.
With all this complexity,
Yeah.
everyone has a different microbial fingerprint. A different childhood diet. Is a one-size-fits-all diet even possible?
And that is the most important question. The answer is an emphatic no. This is why microbiome analysis is becoming so critical. Your bacterial makeup is as unique as your fingerprint. What's medicine for one person can be poison for another.
Can you give us a concrete example of that, where general advice goes wrong?
A perfect one is SIBO, or small intestine bacterial overgrowth. Now, generally, things like kefir, pickles, sauerkraut fermented foods are great. They feed the good bacteria in your large intestine.
Right. Everyone says to eat more fermented foods.
But for someone with SIBO, where bacteria have overgrown into the small intestine, eating those same foods causes a massive, painful flare-up.
Because you're overfeeding an overgrown population in the wrong place.
Exactly. So blindly following that generic advice can be incredibly harmful. You have to tailor the approach to your specific internal factory floor.
So the goal isn't just weight loss. It's about stopping this blind obedience to the inner voice of the bacteria and reclaiming control for yourself.
That's it. Once the dependence is broken, once you're through that withdrawal phase, you reach a place of real food freedom. Having a piece of cake becomes a choice, not a compulsion driven by a starving microbial colony.
A profound difference. So the key lesson for you, the listener, is that this dependency is a biological reality. It's rooted in your gut. It's not about willpower. Breaking free means understanding that the difficult withdrawal phase is temporary, and it's actually a sign of success.
And, this principle goes way beyond food. If anything in your life, a substance, a habit, even an emotion like greed or ambition causes you distress and limits your freedom, it's functioning as a dependency, and it requires conscious work.
That's a powerful way to frame it. So here is a final thought for you to consider from all this. Really think about the distinction between your brain wanting a food because it actually benefits your cells versus your gut bacteria talking to your brain through the vagus nerve, demanding fuel just for their own survival. Are you feeding yourself or are you just feeding the colony?